I'm Reverend Ellen Rasmussen. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and it is my great joy to welcome you to Reflections with me. And today we are going to engage in the topic of labor justice, and it happens to be Labor Day weekend, right? So I hope you are enjoying your holiday weekend. Now, it may seem like a little strange that your pastor is relating to a secular holiday, because normally I'm not one to do that. And it's not that I'm relating to the celebration of Labor Day, but I am using this occasion to connect faith and life and talk about labor justice. Now, over 100 years ago, you would find Methodist Episcopals, as well as Catholics and other people of faith, marching arm in arm with folks from labor. And we, as Methodist Episcopals, the predecessor of the United Methodist Church, we were instrumental in developing plans to eliminate child labor, to address inadequacies in the workforce. In fact, in our 1908 social creed, we proclaim that people need fair wages. So the Methodist Episcopal Church, a predecessor of the United Methodist Church, adopted a social creed in 1908 that called for an end to child labor, a fair wage, and safety standards. The Methodist Episcopal Church stands for equal rights and complete justice for all people in all stations of life, for the principle of conciliation and arbitration in industrial dissensions, for the protection of the worker from dangerous machinery, occupational diseases, injuries, and mortality, for the abolition of child labor, for such regulation of the conditions of labor for women as shall safeguard the physical and moral health of the community, for the suppression of the sweating system, for the gradual and reasonable reduction of hours of labor to the lowest practical point, with work for all, and for that degree of leisure for all which is the condition of the highest human life, for a release from employment 1 day in 7, for a living wage in every industry, for the highest wage that each industry can afford, and for the most equitable division of the products of industry that can ultimately be devised, for the recognition of the Golden Rule and the mind of Christ as the supreme law of society and the sure remedy for all social ills. Now, we've expanded on that with our current social creed, but our roots as United Methodists are bound together with God. Now, how do you see God in the social creed? Where is the connection to Scripture? And I'm going to invite us to look at Genesis 1, 2, and 3. So Genesis 1 is the first creation story that talks about 7 days. And on the seventh day, God rested. And what all that God created was good. The Genesis 2 story is the second creation story, of which we learn of the first employment, the first job of humanity, which was to tend to the garden in Eden. And while tending to the garden, their first job, as they're laboring with their hands and their bodies, as they are connecting and honoring creation and using it as to the fullest viable sense, it's sustainable. right? Uh, so there's no overuse. There's not there aren't poor practices, right? It is this relationship with humanity and the land, the creation itself, to not only survive, but to live and thrive. And then we move into where we learn that people have such an intimate relationship with God that they recognize his steps or her steps. They recognize God's steps in the garden. And in this, while we look at Genesis 3 as the fall, I'd like to lift up that while being laborers in the garden, being stewards of the gift of creation that God has gifted us, there was time to explore. There was time to learn, to discover, which then leads to creating, because we are created in the image of the Creator, and not that we have the same creative powers. We can't create the universe, but there are ways that we co-create with God. And so as God walks with us in our life, God's call is that we have all that we need, not just to survive, but to thrive, that we have opportunities to express our creativity through our labors. We learn later on in Scripture that each person is endowed with gifts, talents, and graces beyond measure, right? Created in the image of the Creator, and that all of these gifts are valued and precious in the sight of God. Now, we have a tendency not to value all the jobs in our community. We have a tendency, unless we do work together, to lift up some folks and actually oppress and constrain others. And if we were to live our lives fully exemplifying what God, the employer in the Garden of Eden, all workers would be blessed for their efforts. They would have all that they needed. That included food, shelter, time away for recreation, for exploration, for creativity, and their future would be assured. So they're in having their life fully, they would have access to health care, quality health care, affordable health care. They would be able to bank, in essence, funds that can help them in their retirement to continue to sustain life. Not that we find retirement list in the Bible, so some may say, well, retirement's not scriptural, but we work at different phases in our lives, and there are times when we need to rest and to be renewed and to also serve as mentor. And there are times we need to, as we journey, we're creating space for the new folks, right? For our youth to develop into who they are called to be. And through all of this, God is walking with us. And God calls us to a life that is full of God's love and grace and justice and hope. So this Labor Day weekend, I invite you to think of the connection between God and creation, God in labor. And I invite you to pray for all the workers everywhere at whatever level. I invite you to pray for our systems that are just and reflective of the Holy and Sacred One that allows or helps celebrate and draws out the gifts, talents, and graces of each and every one. I invite you to look at the labor rules that are around you and to be open to how we can be better. Now, we may think that in Wisconsin, there is no need for unions, but unions allow people to gather together, to work together, to be of one mind, so to speak, and work with those who employ them. Not everything is just, but I think together we can find just ways to live and move and have our being. We have harmful labor practices at work in our communities. We have stolen hours, stolen wages, unsafe practices, and we can see the gross inequity between those who labor and those who massively reap. If we look at the income disparities in our society, there is much work for us to do to develop beloved community where all are valued, where, as the Methodist said, there are equal rights and complete justice for all people in all stations of life. We need to recognize the sacred and the holiness at the core of each person, and also the sacredness and holiness of their work, and seek to provide opportunities for each and every one for the phase in their life to have appropriate opportunities for creation, for creating, for work, and to provide just wages for that work. Thank you for being with me this morning. I hope and pray that you have a delightful weekend, that you are able to find rest and renewal and have time with friends and family and celebrate who God has called you to be. Thank you for your ongoing support of the ministries that work through the people of Brown Deer United Methodist Church into our community, and for our ministry partners. Give thanks for your support, and if you'd like to give online, here's the information. We'll see you next week.